Hello. So in today's lesson, we are looking at why did the Spanish Armada fail? We've got two learning objectives. First of all, we're going to recap why the Spanish Armada was launched in 1588. And also we need to understand why it did not succeed. Why were England able to defend themselves against Spain? And there's lots of different factors we're going to look at there. Now, I've given you two quizzes for this lesson, quiz 1 and quiz 2, and I will prompt you when to complete those. The deadline is Tuesday, the 14th of July at 5 p.m. But year 10, I would also encourage you to write flashcards or mind map posters as well. Do not just complete the quizzes and leave it at that. Create your own revision material so you can actually understand this a year from now for the exams. The Spanish Armada is a key part of the course, and so it is possible you will have an exam question on it. You need to have good knowledge of these factors we're going over today. And as always, any questions you've got, gbrown@stopsleyhighschool.co.uk. So, Elizabeth had faced many threats to her position as Queen of England. And if I ask you to think of what have you studied during this topic, what threats have we seen her face, hopefully you would be able to reel some of them off, such as the revolt of the Northern Earls, the Ridolfi plot, the Throckmorton plot, the Babington plot, and the fact that Catholic Mary Queen of Scots was in England. And because this was someone, a member of the royal family that the Catholics could legitimately place on the throne and save their Catholic religion, this was the cause of all of those plots. But we've seen from previous lessons that Mary Queen of Scots was executed in 1587. But the biggest threat to Elizabeth was still to come. These are all sort of minor threats, I guess you could say. It's a bit like a computer game when you face these minor threats, and then at the end of the game you've got the big boss to defeat. Well, that's what we're looking at in today's lesson, the big boss, in the shape of Spain and Philip II. Now, there were 4 reasons why Spain launched the Armada. We looked at those factors last lesson. Just pause the video. How many of those can you remember? Okay, well, the 4 were religion, politics, provocation, and circumstances. Now, I'm going to recap those very quickly now for you. First of all, religion. The fact that the Catholics in Europe, including Spain, want Protestant Elizabeth removed. She is seen as a figurehead for the Protestant religion. They want England to be Catholic again. They want to save their religion. They feel that Protestantism is a threat to their way of life. And you can see evidence of this with the Catholic involvement in plots. You've got the Pope as well. The Pope had excommunicated Elizabeth, if you remember. She wasn't recognised by the church anymore. She was seen as an enemy of the Catholic faith. And the Pope had issued papal bulls saying this. And the Pope had also said he would forgive the sins of those who took part in the Armada and give Philip II a big old cash reward as well for taking part in it if he was successful. Politics as well. The fact that things had changed recently for Spain. First of all, they were no longer rivals with France. They had signed the Treaty of Joinville in 1584. That meant that Philip could now look at other countries that were seen as threats, and England was on that list. Also, the fact that a year later, 1585, Elizabeth had signed the Treaty of Nonsuch. Remember, that was signed at Nonsuch Palace in England with the Dutch Protestants. Elizabeth had said that she would support the Dutch Protestants against the Spanish. And also the fact that Philip was looking to grow his empire, and actually England would have been a useful addition. Remember, the bigger the empire, the stronger Spain would be as a result. Provocation, of course, Sir Francis Drake going along, the pirate, stealing all of that money from those Spanish ships, coming up to the New World, destroying ports there, destroying Spanish ships. And what had Elizabeth done? She had rewarded him publicly. She had knighted him on his ship, the Golden Hind, when he returns. And also the fact Elizabeth had been supporting Dutch Protestants secretly. Things like the Sea Beggars, for example. We can see here the alliances that she was building up. The fact that she was supporting others attacking Spain. The Duke of Alencon, the William of Orange as well, the Treaty of Nonsuch. Elizabeth has provoked Spain for a number of years now. And finally, circumstances. What had changed in just under a decade before the Armada was launched? Well, 1579, the Duke of Parma was able to get the Netherlands back under Spanish control when it looked like Spain were going to lose the Netherlands for a while. In 1580, Spain acquired Portugal, making their empire larger and more powerful. And the fact Elizabeth had been reluctant to fully commit to attacking Spain in the Netherlands. And that made Philip realise actually maybe England was quite weak after all and the time was right to invade. So those four factors you need to be aware of when we looked at those last lesson. So what was the plan for the Armada? Well, the Armada would set sail from Spain 21st of July 1588 and it would begin a 10-day voyage to England. So it would sail along the coast. Sailing along the channel when the Duke of Parma would have boats and troops ready. Remember, he is in the Netherlands and he would have his troops ready to attack England. These two fleets of ships would meet up. They would then sail towards England. They would land in Kent. They would have 27,000 Spanish troops on board. And this would begin an invasion that would get rid of Elizabeth and make England Catholic once again. So that was the plan. But before they could even set sail, something major happened on the 19th of April 1586. It's called the singeing of the King's beard. And if you remember last lesson, Drake had been told by Elizabeth in 1585 to go and sail to the New World, disrupt Spanish colonies as much as possible. Well, on his way there, Drake arrived in Cadiz, Spain's most important port, and he saw all of these ships being prepared, being built, ready for the Armada. But a lot of these ships were unsupervised at the time, and so Drake just sees an opportunity, and he just goes crazy. He starts to fire at these Spanish ships. They were loaded up with goods and provisions, but there weren't really too many people on board. No one was expecting a surprise attack. And so Drake was able to sink 30 ships before sailing away to the New World, where he caused more havoc. Now that meant those provisions that had been placed on the boat ready to go, things like cannonballs, barrels with the food, they had to be made again. And Drake had also been able to capture a lot of the stocks of what we'd call seasoned wood. Now, this is where you get to make things like barrels. It's a special type of wood. And so Spain were having to make new provisions very quickly with lesser quality materials. And we'll come back to that later on because that would really hurt the Spanish. Now, this disruption did not stop the Armada from happening. It was always going to happen, but it delayed it by a year. This gave England time to prepare, and it meant that Spain, like I said, had to rush to replace those supplies. So, 20th of July 1588, the first sighting of Spanish ships was seen in Plymouth. Now, there were, again, this is something you're not going to need for your exam, this next bit, but there were rumours, there's a brilliant story, that Sir Francis Drake was playing bowls, as you can see here on this picture. It's what people did while they were waiting for Xbox to be invented. And he's told, Spanish invading, we've seen Spanish ships. And Drake doesn't panic at all. Drake just goes, well, we'll carry on playing. He said, there's time to complete the game and defeat the Spanish. Now, that is almost certainly not true. That's probably a myth that's developed over time, but it does fit Drake's personality really well. I would absolutely love that to be true. Again, you will not need to mention that in your exam. Don't mention it. But that's our starting point for this lesson. So could you please complete quiz 1 and submit it afterwards? The yellow slides will help you here. Press play to continue once you're done. Okay, so why did this attack fail? Well, Spain's one of the most powerful countries in the world at this time, if not the most powerful world. Just look at the empire they've got on that map there, the area in red. Why did it fail? Why was this tiny little island of England able to defeat them? Well, there's lots of factors we're going to look at here. First of all, the leadership. Elizabeth listened to her advisors for years before the Armada set sail. Okay, you could say that she was playing up to her gender here, I guess, the fact that Elizabeth was seen as weaker possibly as a woman. So she played up to that straight by Epty, saying, look, I will listen to these men and see what they've got to say. Well, she was led by some very experienced people. For example, John Hawkins said, we need to make new boats. And from 1578, he had been investing time in making these new boats. They were called galleons, and it meant that they could actually move much quicker. We'll look at those in a minute. She's also got commanders out at sea like Sir Francis Drake who knew what they were doing, and she trusted them with the tactics. She trusted them with the naval manoeuvres. Elizabeth said, do what you've got to do to win. I'm not going to tell you how to fight. You do what you have to do to win. She did not interfere. Whereas on the other side, Philip II, he tried to plan everything himself, even though he had no real knowledge of naval warfare fighting at sea. And Philip II was not going to be obviously taking part in the Armada himself. He is far too important to lose on a sinking ship. Now, he was quite unlucky because 6 months before the Armada launched, he lost his best naval commander, a guy called Santa Cruz. And so he had to find someone who was going to lead the Armada. He places a man called the Duke of Medina Sidonia in charge. Medina Sidonia says, I'm not sure I'm the right person here. He basically begs him to reconsider. Medina Sidonia even gets seasick easily on the voyage. He has no naval warfare experience. All of the fighting he has done is on land before, and he didn't really think the Armada would work. But when he tries to give that feedback back to Philip, Philip just responds. He ignores Medina Sidonia. He says, pull yourself together. It's a direct quote there by Philip to the Duke of Medina Sidonia. So we can see there's a contrast, isn't there, between the two leaders and how they're responding to feedback from others. Reason 2, the English boats. So England had been building these new ships called galleons for over 15 years. These new ships were easier to sell and they were faster than Spanish boats. The Spanish warships traditionally were very big, very difficult to maneuver. These galleons were smaller, easier to turn, and the fact is, though, there were only 24 of them made by 1588. Let's face it, it takes a lot of time to make a boat. Weapons. Now, there was a difference in weapons as well there. If you can see on the bottom of the screen, that is a Spanish cannon. And then on the top is an English cannon. Now, what difference can you notice between the two? Okay. Hopefully you've realised, because it says it on the screen as well, hopefully you've realised that the gun carriages are of different sizes. Now, with a cannon, you cannot just mount a cannon on the floor of a ship. Okay, that won't work. If we imagine, for example, that this bottle is squash, calm down, drank the booze ages ago in lockdown. Now, if we imagine this cannon is on the bottom, or it's attached to the floor of a ship when it fires, it will just fly back and it will just rip the ship apart, won't it? So we need to put it on a carriage. And Spain had really big gun carriages for the cannons. So they would fire the cannon and it would fly back. The gun carriage would fly back as well as the cannon once it's fired. As you know from your science, every reaction has an equal and opposite reaction. If you are firing a cannonball forward out of the ship, then the cannon and the gun carriage will fly backwards as a result. This takes time to go and to get the gun carriage, pick it back up again, pick up the cannon, and go and get ready to relaunch. Now, the English realised this, and so they had smaller gun carriages. So when they fired, yes, the gun carriage still went back, but it was smaller. It was easier to pick up. It was quicker to get ready again. So was the cannon. And so you could fire more cannons as a result. There we go. The cannon could be reloaded more quickly when it flew back. Therefore, the English could fire more shots than the Spanish. Okay, let's go back to poor supplies. Now, I told you in the first half of this lesson that Sir Francis Drake had sailed to where Spain were preparing in Cadiz the year before, and he had sunk in total over 100 of them. 30 in Cadiz itself, and then others as he was going around the ports in the New World. And this event was called the Singeing of the King's Beard. Now, like I said, these boats had been loaded ready for the invasion. It was all organised, it was all carefully prepared. The barrels had ammunition in, like gunpowder. There was food in the barrels as well. And this meant that Spain had to basically restock these boats as quickly as possible because it was now at the bottom of the ocean. They had to produce a lot of ammunition very quickly, and they had to remake barrels. And like I told you, the seasoned wood was no longer really available to them, so they're making barrels out of cheap wood. It starts to rot in the water very quickly. That means that once they've set sail, the food barrels on a lot of ships started to rot. The food was starting to go off. And the cannonballs were rushed. They weren't particularly well made. And so when we've got archaeological evidence today of a lot of the cannonballs that we found on the ocean, it looks like they weren't properly made. They wouldn't have fired properly as a result. So there are poor supplies there. Okay, reason 5, lack of deep sea ports, I should say, not pots. Never mind. If you remember from last lesson, I told you that the only real success Dudley had had in the Netherlands was to keep the port of Ostend. It's probably the only thing you've been thinking about since you watched that lesson. This is why it was so important. The Spanish army in the Netherlands, as a result, didn't have any deep sea ports. Now, when I say deep sea ports, I basically mean a port like you can see in the picture, and the water by the edge of that port is about 20 meters deep. Now, if you imagine, if you've got your big warship full of your soldiers and your sailors and your ammunition and so on, that's going to be incredibly heavy. If you've just got it on a beach, you cannot really just push that boat out to sea. It's going to be far too heavy to do that. What you need to do is you need to have that boat on a deep sea port. It needs to be already out to sea 20 meters. You load the boat up, as we can see in the picture, using that port. And then all you need to do is lift the anchor up, turn the sails, and when the wind's right, that boat will just sail away. That won't happen if you don't have deep sea ports. You cannot use large ships as a result. Therefore, this is what the Spanish would need to do. The Spanish would need to have at least 48 hours to load up a lot of smaller ships, sail out to where the big ships were, load those up because there was no port to do it instead, and that's going to take time. Like I said, that's going to take about 48 hours. This makes it hard for the Duke of Parma's army to meet up with the Duke of Medina Sidonia's army. The communication needs to be good between the two of them. That's a very tricky time period there. Okay, English tactics. Like I've just said, it's going to be hard for these two armies to meet up. Really, what we would need is Spain would need for the army to have about 48 hours being left alone once it's near the Netherlands to send a message to the Duke of Parma and say, look, get your ships ready, come and meet us. Communication was difficult. They don't know when it's going to be. Spain would need to sail close to the Netherlands as a result. They need the English to leave them alone. They need time to get the two fleets of ships together. England didn't stop fighting, really, the Spanish ships as soon as they saw them. They started to fire. They never let the boats rest. This means that the ships in the Netherlands never have a chance to meet up with the Spanish ships, and as a result, they were never used. The fighting also took place from a distance. That was very clever. The English cannons could reach further and fire more quickly. Spain weren't used to this. Spain were more used to close quarter fighting as a result. Okay, fire ships. The Spanish Navy had a formation. It was a crescent formation. It was like a C. When they were sailing, it made it quite hard for England to do a severe amount of damage to them. They could fire the cannons, but it was very defensive. Now, the Spanish dropped their anchors near Calais, near the port of Calais, as we can see here on the map. And they basically had the plan of, right, we will wait here. We've sent a message off to the Duke of Parma. We are going to wait here for him to load the boats up. Remember, that takes 48 hours, no deep sea ports. And he will meet us here, and then we will set sail. The English were never going to give them that time to meet up straight away. What the English did was they took 8 of their ships and they set them on fire. They put a lot of flammable material around, things like tar, for example, set them on fire, turn the sails, and the wind, luckily the wind was correct, the wind blew these fire ships towards the Spanish Armada. And they had this defensive formation, and they just had to break it because they could see these boats on fire coming straight towards them. The Spanish had to quickly move the boats out of the way. And some of the ships did not have enough time to use the proper procedure of lifting up the anchor. That took too long. So they panicked, they cut the ropes, and they left their anchors at the bottom of the ocean. This means that the boats did not have anchors anymore to keep the boat steady in case there was bad weather. Remember that for later on. So, that defensive formation was broken. The boats scattered. The next day, the Spanish boats tried to meet back up again once the fire boats had gone. And England used this opportunity to fight the Spanish. The English cannons being very effective at this point, there was no sign of the Netherlands, the troops from the Netherlands. The Duke of Parma hasn't got his boats ready in time. The Spanish had no option but to retreat. But the Spanish could not retreat back the way they had come. Instead, the Spanish had to move up the north of England and around Scotland and Ireland. Now, it was lucky for the English that the Spanish did start to retreat, because England had run out of gunpowder at this point. Despite the fact that they had actually captured 2 ships early on and took 229 barrels of gunpowder, they'd even used that up as well. At this point, all England could do was just chase the Spanish ships and push them around. You can see that line on the map there. Push them around to the north of England and then up around Scotland and Ireland. So they couldn't retreat the way they had come through the English Channel. Now, this wasn't an unknown route to the Spanish. They had done this before with shipping routes and so on, and they worked out, okay, this is going to take us about 5 weeks to get back with good weather. The next day, a 5-day storm began. This is our last reason, the weather. Now, the weather was so bad that when the boats went past Scotland and Ireland, 40 boats were just blown onto the rocks and they were sunk. If you remember, there's no anchors, there's no way to stop the boats. They are at the mercy of the weather here. 26 of these ships were wrecked around Ireland, and only till today about 6 of them have been discovered. There are still Armada boats on the bottom of the ocean. Those sailors that did manage to jump off the ship and land ashore at Scotland or Ireland were usually killed straight away as soon as the Scottish and Irish realised that they were Spanish. Only if they were very rich were they kept for a possible ransom reward. Thousands were killed at this point, not just in combat, but also the weather. It's not combat that really kills these soldiers. I want to stress this point. It's the weather, it's the poor conditions on the way back. 20,000 Spanish soldiers died in total. But Medina Sidonia did manage to get a number of ships home. He does manage to get them back, 67 in total, which isn't bad considering the circumstances. But when you compare this loss that the Spanish suffered to the English, who lost, I'm going to say only 100 men, and the English lost no ships as well, apart from the fire ships, but those 8 were done on purpose, you can start to see why so many Protestants felt God was on their side in this battle. Now, Elizabeth gave a speech to her soldiers. She was wearing armour, she was on horseback, and this was really her moment to shine. She said she had the heart and stomach of a king. She was showing that actually she should be treated as a man, essentially. That she was just as tough as a man, that she was a tough leader. This was Elizabeth's moment to shine here. And after the Armada failed, portraits were made of her. And if you look in the background of this portrait, you can see the Spanish ships on the right-hand side being blown against the rocks in the storm. It made her seem like a strong ruler. She was the person who would stop the strongest country in the world. And she used this as proof to claim that God wanted people to be Protestant, not Catholic. She said that God blew and the ships scattered. Now, what happened next? Spain tried to launch armadas again in the years to follow, but they all failed. I think the closest they came in the next 10 years was a few Spanish troops landed in Cornwall, but nothing really happened. Philip still believed Catholicism was the true religion. He didn't start with, well, I've got to be a Protestant then. He didn't start changing like that. But Spain did start to decline in terms of money and power. The English troops were really rejuvenated by this. We see an age of England feeling, actually, we can sail out in confidence in the ocean. We can start to explore. The English continued to attack Spanish ships and steal from them. So, quiz 2. Please can you complete that quiz and press submit afterwards. And that is it for today's lesson. Now, that is the second section of Elizabeth done. We've done section 1, looking at Elizabeth and the changes she made as soon as she became leader. And that's the end of section 2, the threats against Elizabeth. Section 3, we will look at when we come back. For now, just make sure you've completed those quizzes. The deadline there is Tuesday the 14th of July at 5 p.m. And as always, any question or feedback you've got, gbrown@stopsyhighschool.co.uk. Thank you so much for completing this lesson, guys. Please look after yourselves, get some exercise and fresh air.